Very well, guys. So we're going to start with this video. Now, this is not something that you need to do on your own, but it's a technique that I want to share with you because I feel like it's one of the parts that a lot of people miss when working on a production pipeline. And this is we need to spend some time analyzing the concept and understanding what we're about to do. It's very, very common, and I do this as well, that I find a concept, I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Let me just open ZBrush, open Maya, open Blender, and start like doing it, right? The thing is, if you just jump straight into doing it without actually thinking about what you're doing, you will run into walls and you will run into issues that might take you more time to solve than if you had analyzed your concept before. So first of all, we need to understand like the overall thing that we need to that we're going to be doing, right? So our main goal is a game weapons, which means that we need to optimize the geometry. We cannot have like 1 million polygons. That would be like impossible for a game to deal with. Nowadays, there are ways to do it. However, again, it's not advisable. We want to optimize this thing. So that means that we're going to be going through something called the high poly, low poly pipeline, okay? We're gonna model an object, let's imagine like a sphere with a lot of divisions and a lot of detail to that object, and then we're gonna simplify that object into a low poly, okay? And we're gonna bake all of these details from this high poly to the low poly so that we can capture all of that information into texture maps that are gonna make the whole thing a lot easier to understand. So even though we are going to be doing a low poly, and technically the high poly, the topology of the high poly doesn't matter as much, it is a good idea to try to model everything as if it was a subdivision level process. Now, before we start like thinking about the topology of these things, let's think about the main areas. How many areas would you say this thing has? I would say we have about 5 or 6. First, we have this thing right here, which is the hammer. Then we have the axe. We got the volcano, the little volcano right there. We got the handle. We got the pommel, and I would consider this a different section as well. So the handle and all of this like metal bits combined with the hammer are one of the main things that we're gonna be poly modeling. So we know that all of those pieces are gonna be poly modeled with traditional modeling techniques, similar to what we did in chapter 0. However, the axe and the volcano, they're a lot more organic, and even the handle right here. So for those right there, we're definitely going to need sculpting, okay? So we're going to jump into the sculpting section of a Blender to be able to get these shapes. The actual blade of the axe, it might be a combination of poly modeling and sculpting, but in general, I do think, especially for this like lava chunks right here, we're definitely going to be doing quite a bit of sculpting. And finally, the pommel over here, it's also going to be poly modeling. Now, when I see a concept like this, I like to ask myself, is there any part that I'm not really sure how to do like in the first time I see it? Like do I see anything that looks a little bit more challenging than what I might think? And right now, the most challenging one is of course the volcano and the blade. However, I do see interesting things right here. So for instance, I see these little spikes. Okay, the question is, do we want to do those spikes as the part of the same like pommel right here or handle, or are they going to be separate pieces? Well, they're probably going to be separate pieces, right? How many of these spikes we have? Well, in this area, I count 4 and 4. However, down here, I count 8. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 4 on the other side. There's a hook on the other side right there. I'm not sure if you guys can see it, but there's like a really, really interesting hook right here that we also need to model. And even though I don't see how this connects to the handle, I can imagine that it's something like this. So again, as you can see, doing this sort of exercise, it's a really fun and easy way to understand the shape of your object before you jump into modeling. Because if we just jump into model without really taking the time to analyze things, we will have mistakes. We will make mistakes throughout the way. Now, another thing that I like to do is count how many actual parts do I have. One of the things that you need to understand is we don't need to model everything from a single shape. So let me grab a different color and start like here. So we're going to have, oh, that's a horrible color. Let's go white. So we have one piece right here. This is another one. This is another one. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So it's about 16 parts, as you can see right here. And again, dividing the concept into the different parts that we need to do is also a really good way to go into the mental state of understanding how we're going to tackle such a complex concept. It's very often that you will find a concept and look at it and be like, oh my god, this is too complicated. But if you break it down into smaller chunks, it becomes a lot easier to manage. So once that I know the kind of methods that I'm going to be using, the amount of parts that I'm going to be using, my next thing, or the next thing that I usually like to do, is I like to create what I call my attack plan. Like, how am I going to be tackling this specific concept? I think we're going to start with the handle. So we're going to start with all of this section right here. That's going to be our first like couple of chapters. We're going to start from simple to complex. After we're finished with the handle, we're going to do a very rough like creation of the volcano, a very rough creation of the blade, so that we can focus on the next part, which is going to be the hammer. Okay, so all of these metal bits, which is all poly modeling, all of this is going to be the second part. The third part is actually going to be the volcano. Why the volcano? Because the volcano is merely sculpting. It's all sculpting that we have to do. We really don't need to worry about like modeling or anything. And with the axe, we're going to have to combine both things. We're going to have to combine modeling and sculpting for to get this sort of like effect that we have right here. So yeah, that's pretty much the plan. Now, the last thing that I like to do when analyzing a concept, and this is one of the secret techniques that I'm going to show you right now, is I like to do a topology cheat sheet, which means that if there's a specific part of the element that I'm not sure how I would model, I like to just draw on top of it and create some interesting lines to give myself an idea of how I would construct this part. So for instance, this piece right here, if I just go to the borders of this piece and I draw a couple of lines, I can understand, and this is for myself, this is not something that I show my clients or anyone, this is just something that I do as an exercise to understand how building this thing can be a lot easier, right? So we're probably gonna have a couple of lines right there, this is gonna go down, and I also like to do some sketches to understand how the general shape of this hammer is, because again, we don't have a perfect like front view or side view, so I need to understand that this piece, if I were to see it from the front, it's probably gonna be like this, right? So we're gonna have that little thing right there go inside and something like this. So by understanding the shape before we go into Blender and model it, we're gonna have a lot more success than if we try to just figure this out on the go. Same thing for this guys right here. Like I can very, very easily see how all of this like low poly versions are gonna be constructed. And I know that if I see this guy from the top, it's gonna be this sort of like L shape, right? So if I build this L shape inside of Blender, I'm gonna be able to create this shape right here. Same for this one. If I see the side of this thing, I can see that it's not perfectly flat. It has a little bit of a curvature to it. So something like this is gonna be the shape of the hammer. So all of these things are the things that we're gonna have to deal with once we're inside of Blender. And we're gonna go through a process called the blocking, where we're gonna create very basic shapes inside of Blender to, again, capture the general silhouette and form of this thing without actually modeling anything, just to get an idea of whether or not we're going in a good direction. So that's it for this one, guys. Again, you don't need to do this whole analysis, but I wanted to share this with you because this is one of the secrets that people sometimes don't share, but we always do, to make sure that we understand properly what we are doing to get to the final result. So we like get a general plan of what type of techniques we're going to be using. We divide the amount of parts to make sure that we are aware of all of the different like bits that we have on the piece. And then we divide, or I personally like to divide it into sections. For instance, when I'm doing a character, I divide things into like torso, arms, legs, back, hands, feet, head. And that way I can like move in stages, right? And finally, we can like analyze specific parts of the model, parts that might be a little bit tricky, and try to get them, or try to understand the forms as best as possible before we actually go in and model. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this one, my friends. In the next one, we're gonna be doing the blocking. So hang on tight, and I'll see you back in the next video.